When I inherited my grandfather's cabin, I thought I was getting a quiet little escape, just some peace and fresh air by a lake. What I didn't expect was to end up in a full-on battle with a homeowners association dealing with a clipboard-wielding tyrant and eventually facing off in court over who really owned the paradise. My grandfather wasn't the kind of guy to hug it out or take you fishing. He was, well, let's just say he was as emotionally available as a brick wall. But he left me something far better than any cliché grandfather moments. He left me a cabin. Not a big fancy one either, mind you. It was more like a wooden box that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Reagan years. But to me it was perfect. I was 36, stuck in a beige apartment in Dallas, working remotely as a real estate attorney. The idea of getting away from the city, of escaping the grind for some peace and quiet, felt like a sweet deal. So when the paperwork cleared, I packed up, grabbed my toolbox, and headed 3 hours into the woods. I was more excited than I cared to admit, like a kid going to Disneyland, if Disneyland was a 70s-style cabin with a failing roof and no air conditioning. When I first laid eyes on the place, it was rough. The porch leaned like it was bowing to the weight of time. The dock was barely hanging on, missing a few planks, and the solar panels on the roof were about as effective as using a chocolate teapot to boil water. But it was mine, and the lake behind it shimmered like it was holding on to a secret too good to tell. It was quiet, so quiet that all those email chains and HOA fines from work didn't even feel real anymore. So I started coming up every weekend. A little at a time, I began fixing things, patching holes, sealing windows, rewiring the solar panels. As I worked, I found boxes of documents in the attic, all hand-labeled by my grandfather. Deeds, permits, even water rights from the 70s. He was meticulous. This wasn't just a cabin, it was a fortress disguised as a shack. The cabin sat at the edge of Bluewood Shores, a development that had sprouted up around it. Bright colors, kayaks everywhere, and people who waved like they were auditioning for a Hallmark movie. But I wasn't part of it. My grandfather's land had been grandfathered out of the development, no pun intended. The HOA had nothing to do with it. Still, that didn't stop people from wandering over. One morning while I was fixing a step, a guy jogged past, stopped and asked, "Hey, are you renting this place?" We didn't think anyone lived out here. I told him, "Nope, I own it." He gave me a weird half nod like I'd answered wrong and just jogged off. It wasn't just him. A woman walking her dog let it pee on my canoe. Some teenagers parked near my place and started making out like it was a scene out of a teen movie. And every now and then some kid would show up with a fishing rod like my dock was a public amenity. At first I didn't mind. Let them fish. Let them think the lot was public. But that was my mistake. The parking lot started getting busier. Minivans, SUVs, all with HOA decals. One Saturday, I counted 10 cars parked under a folding canopy with Bluewood swim team spray painted across it. It was then that I realized I had stepped right into their territory without even knowing it. But it didn't matter to me. I owned the land. The cabin, the dock, the lot, even the lake was legally mine. My grandfather had dotted every I and crossed every T, and I knew I was on solid ground. But something in the air felt off. Waves turned into glares. Conversation stopped when I walked by. Someone even posted a flyer about preserving community values on the nearby bulletin board. At first I didn't pay attention. I was busy working on repairs. But I should have known. Peace never lasts long when HOAs get curious. Then came the letter. It was unmarked, no stamp, just slipped into my mailbox like it was some passive-aggressive note from a nosy neighbor. It read, "Dear occupant, your current construction and occupancy are in violation of Bluewood Shores HOA architectural and residency guidelines. We ask that you cease development and vacate the premises." And on and on. No letterhead, no signature, just a vague, unsigned threat from the HOA. I read it twice, stood there in the sunlight, and just laughed. They didn't like anything that wasn't pre-approved, and apparently me fixing up my grandfather's old cabin was a threat to their perfectly manicured little world. I tossed the letter into my truck's glove box. If they wanted to play paperwork games, they picked the wrong guy. I'd spent 10 years drafting contracts tight enough to choke a snake, but I wasn't going to respond. Not yet, anyway. Then a week later, another letter showed up. This time it was certified mail. Karen Wells, the HOA president, had stepped up her game. It was more of the same. I was in violation, and they demanded I vacate until my residency was approved by the review committee. That afternoon, she showed up in person. Karen Wells, in her mid-50s, with perfect blonde hair, khakis ironed like military fatigues, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was part of her DNA. She looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. "Mr. Rand," she said, "I'm the president of Bluewood Shores HOA. Your structure is non-compliant with our codes." I stood up, dusted off my hands, and smiled. "Nice to meet you, Karen. But I'm not in Bluewood Shores. My property borders it, but it's not part of it." She didn't flinch. "Your property borders the lake, which is considered a shared community asset. Your cabin has visual impact on our space, and your gravel drive crosses HOA-maintained land." I calmly told her the lake wasn't public. It was a private reservoir built and registered back in '74. My grandfather owned it. Now I did. She blinked, then laughed like I had cracked a bad joke. That was the first shot fired, but I knew this wasn't going to be solved with a nice chat. Not when the HOA's fingers were already deep in the pie. They were ready for war. I wasn't, but I'd learned the art of legal combat well, and I was prepared to fight. Then came the banner. Bluewood Family Lake Day, it screamed in bright blue and yellow letters. Cars were packed into my gravel lot, HOA decals all around, and people were setting up tents and grills like they owned the place. I rolled up, slowly parked, and just sat there for a moment, absorbing the absurdity. They were having a party on my land, and not a single person asked. I approached Karen, who was standing there with a clipboard looking like the world's most over-enthusiastic hostess. "Karen," I said, "you're on private property." "Oh, Austin," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're just enjoying a long-standing community tradition." I didn't blink. "You're trespassing. You didn't ask. You didn't give notice. And you set up equipment on land you don't own." She laughed it off. "Oh, come on, no harm done." But I was done playing nice. "No. This lake, this dock, this gravel lot, all of it is mine. And I'm putting a stop to this." Her smile froze. "You're being very hostile," she said. I didn't budge. "I'm being very clear." And with that, I started the long, messy process of shutting her down, putting up signs, sending certified letters, calling in security measures. They were clearly not getting the message, but I wasn't giving up. Then came the lawsuit. Karen and the HOA took me to court, claiming the lake was a public resource by tradition and that I was denying them access to what was rightfully theirs. They even tried to argue that the gravel lot had some easement by necessity. Cute, right? I filed back with my own counterclaims, land misuse, trespassing, and a nice little demand for compensation for all the unauthorized use of my property. And the cherry on top, a request for $140,000 in damages. I remember walking into court with my stack of meticulously organized documents. I wasn't there to make a point. I was there to finish the job. Karen's lawyer opened with a lot of passion and no paperwork. He threw around terms like customary use and community value like they were magic words. But I was ready. I laid out the evidence. The documents, the recordings, the emails from a whistleblower. The HOA had been using my property for years, holding events and even collecting dues for services they didn't provide. The judge wasn't impressed. Karen's defense fell apart in front of her. By the time we were done, it was clear who the real owner of the land was, and it wasn't Karen. In the end, I walked out of that courtroom with a victory and a court-awarded settlement of $19,000, not to mention the $50,000 civil penalty slapped on the HOA for their lies. It wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for what was mine. And as for Karen, well, she disappeared from Bluewood Shores faster than you can say private property. I guess she learned the hard way that you can't steal paradise even with a clipboard in hand. It's quiet now. The lake, the cabin, all of it just as it should be. No more parties, no more flyers, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the water lapping at the shore. And as for me, I've got the sign, and I've still got the receipts.